Welcome back to the Business of Biotech. I'm Matt Pillar, and on today's show, we're going to dissect the makings of a successful relationship between a VC and a biotech startup. Now, we've often had conversations on the show with leaders of new biotechs on their fundraising strategies, and we've had a few conversations with VCs on their investment strategies. But on today's show, we're going to get both perspectives. Ray Therapeutics is a brand new company working in the promising new field of optogenetics. And 4BIO Capital is a London-based VC firm that counts Business of Biotech alumni such as Araris, Code, Sparing Vision, Orchard, and Ceres Therapeutics in its past and present portfolio, and which has planted an early seed in Ray Therapeutics. Joining me in the studio are Ray Therapeutics co-founder and CEO Paul Bresge and 4BIO managing partner Dmitry Dima Kuzmin. Dmitry, Paul, it's a pleasure to have you guys on the show. Like I said, I'm excited about this because it's gonna be a cool conversation, bringing both perspectives together about your story and the working relationship between the two of you. So thanks for joining me.
Okay, thank you for having me.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, my pleasure. And Dima, I want to jump right into it and start with you. So there's been a sort of a level set around where we are in the market right now from a venture capital perspective. For the past, I don't know, every time I say it, I feel like I need to add a month. For the past 12 months, 16 months, 18 months, there's been all this talk about investor discernment in capital markets of late. So your background strikes me as one that would offer you, specific to the biopharma space, an awful lot of discernment ability. I don't know if that's one word or two, if I just made it up, discernment ability, but you've got this PhD in neurochemistry, a doctoral fellowship at Max Planck, postdoc at UCL, MSc in experimental therapeutics, assistant professorship at Yale. In my mind, that all adds up to a super unique ability to be incredibly discerning in your role as a VC. So tell us about that. Tell us about how education and sort of subsequent board work has informed your investment decisions.
Sure. No, thank you for your kind words. I wouldn't definitely say that's unique. There's plenty of extremely talented physician scientists in the industry making investment decisions day and night. So yeah, and it's a privilege to work in this community. It's a privilege to work with Paul and other CEOs and with their unique backgrounds. It's also a privilege to work in a community where people are very professional and very, very deep down the rabbit hole. So in terms of like the learnings, the unique perspective that this brings, it all really comes down to just like, how do you make good decisions, experience, how do you get experience making bad decisions, right? And I think in terms of our unique perspective on bad decisions is committing to the data and committing wrongly, making a wrong call on the data, and then taking a learning from that, and in the future making a better call on the data. I would probably say that there are two things that are quite interesting and orthogonal. In an environment like this, which I will proudly call a bear market, you would say that people will, or groups with sufficient levels of discernment ability will be more risk-taking than others. Because when you're a generalist investor, when everything looks cool, it looks cool. When everything looks crap, it looks crap. And so naturally, there is a fair amount of just generalist thinking and crowd type behavior. Yeah. Whereas when you are actually paying attention to the data and exclusively to the data and the people you're working with, the fact that the weather's changed doesn't mean that the data's changed. And so you would still be taking risk in an environment which looks very hostile to people. So you will often find that people with sufficient depth of technical background and enough battle scars are still taking risk. We are still taking risk, and other investors of our phenotype are still taking risk in today's environment. So you would say we are more risk-taking quite unexpectedly than our peers. And then the second learning, I would say, is one has to learn to live with technical and clinical uncertainty. What I often say in the market, especially over the past 18 to 24 months, which has been quite a beating for the gene therapy subsector, which I come from by background as an academic, and then I've invested into heavily, including Ray. Gene therapy had some setbacks. We can be very open about that. AV had setbacks, lentiviruses had setbacks, there have been commercial setbacks, and so on and so forth. At the same time, it still remains the single safest drug modality by numbers we've ever had. And it also remains quite an outstandingly commercially successful modality in between several approved drugs now. So in this current environment, you have to be conscious of what is real and what is sentiment, and be prepared that in any new modality you're investing in, there is inherent risk and you cannot magic it out in any way. So you have to diversify and pay attention. So these, I think, are the two comforts one derives from having a lot of deep technical background and battle scars.
Yeah.
It's ability to take risk and ability to live with long-term uncertainty.
Do you a quick follow up on that? And you use the word data several times, which is completely understandable. And you talked about more sort of generalist investors in life sciences and more specifically biopharma. Do you find in your role now, do you find in your position at 4BIO that potential sponsors, potential those seeking funds fall into a data ready camp versus sort of a premise, trying to sell you on the premise sort of camp? Like, do you see that? Because, it occurs to me that if I'm seeking funding and I have supreme confidence in my data, I may look to, one faction or element of the VC crowd. If I'm seeking funding and perhaps my data is not where it should be, but I think I have a really cool premise, I may look for a more naive segment of that crowd. What are your thoughts there? What do you see?
I wouldn't say naive. I wouldn't call any participant in the market naive. Market tends to be quite a rational place with just a lot of people with different theses. And some theses might work better in a bear market. Some theses might work better in the bull market. I do believe that data first thesis works better in a bear market or in the flat market. In the bull market, definitely a platform premise thesis has worked incredibly well for many tech bio funds, many tech funds, and for many biotech funds. It's perfectly fine. So I think these things are in balance. And you're exactly right that there are market participants that look to collaborate with other market participants. That's a rational decision for them. However, I would say that the amount of liquidity in the market does influence what you can sell. So definitely it is easier to sell a dream or promising data, early stage data in a bull market, and that's what you should be selling in that market. Yeah. In the bear market, you can only sell, in my opinion, two things. One, a really robust data set. Two, a very early idea.
Yep.
Or with very little original data. Because an early stage idea will always be cheap, but there will always be investors willing to take a risk on that. And then a robust, mature data set is what people need. Everything in between right now is crossing a valley of death.
Yeah, interesting. All right, Paul, I want to turn to you. In my intro, I painted this picture of Dima as having this, incredible kind of dyed-in-the-wool academic pedigree that no one would be able to pull the wool over his eyes and get his company to release a penny of funding without good data and good science, because he's so credentialed. Not to take anything away from you, but you, on the other hand, your background doesn't look like you were born to be a biopharmaceutical executive, right? You didn't come out of school with these etched in biopharma credentials. Your business experience spans leadership of several spaces: pharma contract manufacturing company, an industrial tool distributor, logistics service provider, and a couple of early stage biotechs as well. But there's when I look at that, I say, well, there's a bit to unpack, and that starts with what motivated the move away from some of these other industrial leadership experiences and into biotech with J-Site and now Ray Therapeutics.
Sure. I mean, the move was very personal. In 2010, my middle daughter, her name is Tamar, she had just turned 15 and was diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa and told by the chief ophthalmologist at Toronto Sick Kids Hospital that she was going blind and that there was nothing that could be done to help her. I didn't realize until much later on in my life how helpful this was, but my father was actually the founder of a Canadian division of a generic pharmaceutical company. So I grew up in, very much in that environment. And then I started my career in contract manufacturing for the generic, pharma world. I had a very entrepreneurial spirit, so I left that and I went out, into various other things, some of which you've mentioned. But again, in 2010, life took me right back into the space out of necessity. I had, the very good fortune of having personal resources to be able to step out of everything that I was doing to look for and get involved in finding a cure for my daughter. I had, amazing contacts in the pharma world that were very helpful in, selecting the program, doing due diligence, selecting the program that I got involved in. In 2011, I identified some very promising science at the University of California, Irvine. It was a husband and wife team, and they had, what I thought and what my due diligence team thought was incredible data, proof of concept data for a cell therapy for slowing down the progression of retinitis pigmentosa. So I somehow, convinced them to allow me to get involved. So I got involved in that program really from inception before JSITE was even formed, and ended up staying with that program for a decade, all the way through what is now, embarking on a phase 3 program and a partnership with Santen Pharmaceuticals. So in 2020, we did a deal with Santen. I stayed on until, the end of the year. And then in 2001, I co-founded Ray with the original founders of the RetroSense program, which was the first optogenetics program to go into clinic. And the reason why I was so excited to get into Ray is that it really rounded out my mission. So what we know from the data, and this is public from JSITE, is that the therapy seems to work best in patients that are early on in the disease to slow the progression of the disease. But to some extent, patients that are blind or nearly blind are often left behind. Many of the very exciting approaches in gene therapy and in cell therapy are targeted to slowing down progression, but not really restoring vision. So what I absolutely loved about the complement between Ray and JSITE was it addresses all patients with RP and independent of the genetic mutation. So, retinitis pigmentosa, has potentially 100 or maybe even more mutations. Both therapies on the JSITE side and on Ray, it's agnostic to the genetic mutation. So it was a very long-winded answer to your question of, how I made the transition from other industries into biotech, but it's very specific to this very personal mission that I have, not only for, my own daughter, but for now, all RP patients and patients with blinding diseases in general.
Yeah, no, it's that long-winded is good. It's a great complete response. And so I'm curious about, I'm not even sure how to frame the question up, but I'm curious about the translation of your inspiration to execution. Now, I understand that you had the resources, you were fortunate to have some resources to be able to stop what you were doing at that moment in time and devote energy to building out some semblance of an organization that would work on a cure to a disease that was affecting your family. The inspiration part isn't lost on me. I've had plenty of conversations with folks who were, inspired to do something. But I'm wondering what sort of apprehension you might have felt. Sure, you looked around, you said, I've got some resources, I've got some connections, but I sure don't have, at that time anyway, 8 years worth of study into the disease. What was there any level of apprehension around dropping everything and building an organization?
No, I mean, not. There's nothing, I wouldn't do for my child, and it was, very, motivated and still is, by her. I mean, she's an inspiration to me. So, for example, when she was diagnosed, I think, as I mentioned, she just turned 15. The ophthalmologist told her she should consider what she studies and what career she pursues in life, and
based on
the fact that she was losing her vision. And she recently graduated with a master's degree from Tufts University in fine arts, and she does a lot of visual arts. And now she's teaching at Tufts. She's teaching the intersection between writing and art. So she's an absolute inspiration. And yeah, no, I didn't. Once I got involved and once I was satisfied that the therapy, had a lot of promise, there was no apprehension. There was just this absolute drive. How do we get this to patients? And that translates now to Ray. It's the same thing. I mean, we're so focused on how do we get this to clinic, and our excitement around what we anticipate the patient's improvement will be once they're treated with our therapy. So, apprehension isn't even a word that I think about. I'm a true believer, and I've been very fortunate that I've been able to surround myself with very good people with expertise. Dima, one of them, to complement my mission and maybe the specific education or experience that I haven't had in these fields, cell therapy, now gene therapy. Was very fortunate to be awarded a lot of money from the state of California, CIRM, at J-Site, and now at Ray as well. So with the patients in mind, it's amazing how much drive we can have.
Yeah, that's an outstanding story, and I wish your daughter well. I'm going to look her up. I want to see some of her work.
She's
super intriguing.
Please do. Yeah, she actually did a TED talk recently, so if you can find that, it's very, very cool. She's an amazing young woman.
Yeah, I definitely will. In fact, if we had more time, I'd pull it up right now to share with the audience. But you can go Google that yourself. Dima, back to you. So I want to get your perspective on the first blush meeting with Ray and Paul, right? So along comes Paul, and you tell me where the story kind of starts in the continuum of where Paul was on the maturity continuum. But he's got an inspirational story. He's got a lot of motivation. He's got a diverse background. He's founded this company. Just Ray a little bit over a year ago. Obviously some experience with J-Site leading up to that. He's looking for capital. He's got a pretty complex pipeline in optogenetics. You lead the seed round. So what sort of discernment, analysis, examination went into that, and why? Why'd you lead a seed round?
Sure. So
a lot of questions wrapped into one there.
Yeah. So a couple of things here. So first and foremost, Ray is a second generation company. So it's the second time this founding academic, Dr. Joao Pan, is attempting to bring an optogenetic gene therapy in the clinic. And we were one of the VCs in the first attempt, and that company called Retrosense was acquired by Allergan in 2016. So this has been a very successful investment for us. So one of the kind of immediate reasons we all got together in this, so Sean Ainsworth, the chairman of Ray and the former CEO of Retrosense, Paul, and I, was because it kind of, in a way, was getting the old crew back together with the excellent addition of Paul. The second reason is I myself have a background in optogenetics as an academic. And so I've definitely been very interested in the space for now close to 15 years. So definitely tracking more or less everything's happening there. So that was another strong reason why we pounced on the opportunity to do this quite quickly. And then in terms of discernment and analysis, one thing that is actually, and I know it's very important and definitely very inspirational, but to me, a CEO with a personal story is always a risk, 100%.
Sure. Yeah.
Because this means that, we as a venture fund, we're not a charity. We are a venture fund. We have to make a return on investment for our limited partners. And this is the way how we can bring therapies back to patients. So we have to be certain that the person at the helm is aligned with that mission, and he will make the right business decisions, often hard business decisions, to make sure that we get there. And I've seen these stories before. There are other companies in the gene therapy space and outside the gene therapy space that's been built by parents of children, carrying the disease. And unfortunately, not all of them have been successful, as we all know. So there were two key questions for us in our diligence. One, what is the improvement since the first generation? How far has the field moved on? And what can we count on? And we believe that the improvement has been phenomenal in that we are basically now capable of solving every single major limitation that the first generation had in this one product. And most importantly, with all first generation optogenetic therapies, they're not sensitive enough. They're less sensitive than the human opsins. And because of this, all of these patients needed vision magnification goggles to actually see pretty much anything. So it's not a major improvement over a retinal prosthesis. So you still have to have a bulky apparatus and so on and so forth. Whereas we hope that RACE technology will be able to completely do away with that and create new vision or restore vision back to low street level lighting level, which would be outstanding and completely life-changing for these patients. And then the second question for us was the management team. So making sure that Paul, with his background of J-side, as well as his exposure to patient organizations, his personal story, and the people who's getting around him are the best possible people to take this forward. And as the outcome of our diligence, the answer to that was yes. We firmly believe in this management team, and we feel blessed working with them every day.
Nice. Paul, Dima sort of alluded to or indicated, based on 4BIO's history in this space, that they knew what questions to ask to sort of determine how far things have come along. Did you know what questions would be asked? I mean, did you feel prepared kind of going in?
I think very much so, because to a large extent I had those same questions myself. So it was very important after leaving J-site that whatever it was, I knew I would continue my mission for patients with blinding diseases, but I did an extensive amount of due diligence that I was hanging my hat in the right place. So the questions that 4BIO asked of the scientists and the examination of the data was very much a similar process to what I had gone through. So I think we were very well prepared to answer 4BIO's questions. We're very fortunate with that seed round. We were able to raise really as much money as we wanted to for that round. It was an absolute no-brainer for me, once I had an introduction to Dima, that 4BIO was absolutely the right investor for us. Firstly, there was the right chemistry and alignment, and that's a very important consideration when you think about board composition. And also, as Dima alluded to, his very unique expertise in optogenetics. I knew right away that he would be a very very much of a value-added board member. So I think the diligence process, it was extensive, no doubt, but I felt like, again, we were well prepared for it, and it helped validate all the conclusions that I had come to myself through my own due diligence process before actually, getting involved in the program and taking on the CEO position.
Yeah. So, at face value, the fact that you're an optogenetics company and that there's this guy who works for a VC, manages a VC who also happens to be an expert in optogenetics. Yeah, feels like a no-brainer. But you mentioned something else, Paul, in your response just now that I want to, probably regretfully try to dig into, and that's the. I say regretfully because it's one of those fuzzy things that's hard to wrap your arms around. But the cultural match thing, the chemistry. And I hear that all the time when I talk with VCs and about what they're looking for, and when I talk with biopharma execs about their relationships with VCs or any partner, outsourcing partners, for instance. So it's a difficult question. It's an easy question to ask, but a difficult one to answer. But how do you sort of crystallize or characterize, I guess, what a good, and I'm throwing this out to both of you, Dima and Paul. How do you characterize what a good cultural match looks like in a relationship like this? There's an exchange, there's expectations, there's pressure, what does it look like? How do you characterize it? Dima.
Dima, I'll let you go. First of all, I formulate my answer because that is there's a lot in that question.
So, to me, this is there are several relationships in one there, right? There is a relationship of there's a friendship and a business relationship, and in a way a bit of a doctor-patient relationship, if you know what I mean. So there needs to be rapport at the core of things, and most importantly, neither side should be seeking to create anxiety. I think that, number one rookie board member mistake is pressuring the CEO and saying, tell me this. So why is this not working? Or like, what's our response? So that the CEO gets anxious. I know many people, I do not know a single individual who thinks better when they're anxious. I think that is, needs to be taken out of the equation. So it needs to be a relationship of trust and a helpful environment. That needs to be a relationship of transparency. So there are issues arising on all sides, right? There is an issue that there might be a day that when a board decides the CEO has to go, and the board member has to be able, in a calm manner, communicate why and make it a non-threatening environment and show how it's going to be better for everybody. At the same time, there might be a day where the drug fails in the clinic and the CEO has to come to the board and say, look, we've done everything we could. This failed. The biology gave us an answer. Now we need to take steps to either wind down the company or repurpose our drugs or do something else. So unless there is deep trust, transparency, and a really helpful environment, all of this ends in tears and acrimony, and is the worst possible way in which this can end. So for me, the key things: rapport, transparency, and willingness to help and communicate on both sides.
Mm-hmm. Paul, anything?
Yeah, no, I think it's I agree with everything you said, and it made me think of the very early on in after 4BIO made the investment, as there are always things that come up that challenges we don't anticipate. One came up pretty shortly after 4BIO invested, and I sent an email out to the board, and it was a challenging situation, and I got an email back from Dima within 1 or 2 minutes, and he said, call me. And I was like, taking deep breaths to literally, it was the first time we were interacting in a challenging environment or not challenging environment, but of a challenging issue. And so I called him, after making sure that I, had those deep breaths that I needed. And the first thing he said was, how can I help? And that really spoke volumes, and it validated, to use that word again, the fact that we had really made the right decision at Ray by bringing in the right investor.
When you're striving to excel in a new arena, the best guides are the ones already doing it well. The business of biotech brings those voices forward to help new and emerging biopharmas turn their innovations, like mRNA and cell and gene therapies, into clinical realities. Tune in and subscribe for insights on hiring, regulatory, and other need-to-know topics for biopharma leaders. The podcast is brought to you in collaboration with Cytiva. Check out their resources at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA.com/emerging biotech. Dima strikes me as the kind of guy who stands ready to help, and not only ready to help, but capable of helping. Any guy who can cut through my rambling, muddy questions and break it down into a concerted kind of step-by-step response. Like I got to give you a lot of credit, Dima. You're doing a great job interpreting this, the simple-minded Pennsylvania guy's line of questioning. Excellent job.
Well, Matt, as a managing partner of a VC fund, the main thing I'm actually doing is explaining gene therapy to Harvard business majors who make endowment investment decisions.
Mhm.
And that is the best possible time I can have. A lot of them are coal miners or something else. So that there's a lot of explaining going on every day, trying to trust me.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And that kind of leads me to another couple of questions around optogenetics. And I'm glad that I can ask these questions of both of you, given your background, Dima. Because it occurs to me, as we talked about discernment from the outset, the potential of the science, having some insight into the potential of the science has got to be helpful, when you're making investment decisions. So, and you studied that. So tell me, and I'll throw this question out to both of you as well. Tell me a bit more about that science. Tell me a little bit more about like what the premise is here and why it's something worth putting money down on.
Well, maybe I'll start because it'll be more simple, and then Dima can build on that.
There you go.
So, at the most basic level, biologists have known for, decades already that certain microbes move to and away from light. And this ability is driven by certain channel proteins that sit, on the surface of these microbes. And with modern molecular, engineering, scientists have been able to really engineer these proteins and then use gene therapy to express them in certain cells, of the body. So, we're targeting that expression in the retinal ganglion cells. And, because our protein is, so light sensitive, so much more light sensitive than anything else that's out there, we think that there's a lot of promise for this to really become a very meaningful therapy to patients where they'll have formed and useful vision. So that's the most basic answer, but Dima, I'll let you build on top of that.
It's pretty comprehensive. Probably 2 or 3 things to mention are importantly, this technology is potentially applicable to both the diseases where the vision disappears over time because of a genetic defect, and then also to the conditions that pretty closely mirror the biology of those, but arise with age. So we're talking retinitis pigmentosa and Leber congenital amaurosis type 2 on one side, and then dry age-related macular degeneration and geographic atrophy on the other side. Mm-hmm. It remains to be confirmed how much the approach is applicable to either one, because we do not have a clinical read yet, as you know, but we're definitely excited by the promise of the technology more broadly, not only in the very rare genetic conditions. And then secondly, I think what is quite interesting and what I feel very good about Ray because of is a lot of this area and ophthalmology in general is a very challenging area to do clinical trials in, because these diseases are slowly progressive in most cases. The degeneration is very slow, and there's a number of publicly traded gene therapy companies in the eye, of proprietary assets or have partnered assets with big pharma, who are really struggling because of that, because it just takes years or maybe even decades to prove that your drug is actually efficacious in the clinic. Whereas Ray's technology is binary. You put it in a good way, right? It's binary in a good way. You put it in, and if it works, it creates vision or recreates vision. There is no signal, and now there's a signal. You're not waiting for anything to prevent degeneration over the next 5 years. And because of this makes for a much cleaner clinical trial design. And on top of this, we have an absolute genius in Dr. Peter Francis, who's recently joined as the CSO and Chief Medical Officer, who's prior to Ray has been CSO for 4BIO Therapeutics, and prior to that, CMO of Retrosense. And he is definitely as excited as we are about the technology and about its relatively rapid path to the proof of concept in the clinic.
Dima, that your response elicited a few questions in my mind that I want to run by you from a funder standpoint. When you're analyzing the fundability of a potential client, Ray or otherwise, when you're analyzing the fundability, there I go. I might have made up another word. Is fundability a word? If it isn't, I just made it a word. Clinical trials, one thing, what's it going to be like getting through clinical trials? Are we possibly going to get through clinical trials? That's got to be, one of the things top of mind. Market size, right? What's patient population look like? What does this look like down the road if it hits? Jockeys, right? We talk on the show all the time about you bet on the jockeys, not the horse. So who's leading the company? What experience do they have? What's their motivation? What are some other maybe not so obvious markers of a fundable company to a guy in your business?
Well, I mean, there's one pretty obvious one that you haven't mentioned, which is intellectual property, which is never clean, despite what every startup says.
Sure.
And there's a lot of work that goes into that. And then lastly, an acquirer. Personally, I am not a big believer in Nasdaq as an exit mechanism for biotechs. It works well in good times. It is, as we can see, doesn't really work in bad times. So in an ideal world, a big pharma acquires a product. Why does a big pharma acquire a product? Acquires a product because it wants to open a completely new market for itself, or because it feels that its existing market share is threatened, or it can threaten a competitor's market share with a new product. These are pretty much the three reasons why they'd buy anything. So there are certain areas right now in drug development, like say functional neurology or pain, or often women's health, or muscle wasting diseases, and others which are really struggling with acquirers. And ophthalmology, sadly, is rapidly joining the club, because there are several big pharmas that are pulling out from the space. And then there are also several other pharmas who have very large products on the market, very successful products, but don't appear to be defending the market share in any way in terms of ongoing M&A or partnering. So thinking about this is a very important question for us. Who buys this in the end? And I mean, we know the answer for Ray, but when we consider new investments, that is a very, very important aspect.
Yeah, interesting. Ray, was that part of the I'm sorry, Ray. Paul, I'm referring to you as your company.
Okay.
When you went out onto the investment seeking trail, how much of that were you and your team aware of, in terms of what are they looking for to determine fundability?
No, I think we're very much aligned in how we see the best opportunity for the company and the best way for this to get to the patients. I agree with everything that Dima said. So we definitely had those conversations as part of the due diligence process from 4BIO, and again it spoke to the alignment between the rest of the board and myself. As Dima mentioned, Peter Francis is, I think he's really the world expert in optogenetics. He's a clinician, ophthalmologist, PhD scientist. Sean Ainsworth, who's our chairman and was the founder, as we mentioned, of Retrosense. We were all very, very much aligned with the same vision that 4BIO has for Ray. And we've been very fortunate. I mean, the company has been, around since early 2021. Obviously, there was a certain time that it took just to get ourselves, set up. And we've already had interest from several pharma companies. Optogenetics is a very, very exciting part. I would say it's the most exciting. Of course, I'm biased, but still, I would confidently say it's the most exciting area of ophthalmology today for all of the reasons that I think Dima has described for the potential for the therapy.
Yeah, very good. Dima, back to you real quick. I'm intrigued by the alignment of your background and what's going on at Ray and what Ray's working on. And I'm wondering if there's, if you're seeing any trends in the investment space around, and this is, good fodder for our audience of new and emerging biopharma leaders. Are there any trends around sort of real niche specialization in terms of VC firms? Are we heading in a direction where biopharmaceutical funding mechanisms are getting more specialized, kind of moving away from generalization? Hey, we're in the life sciences. Well, now maybe we're specific to ATMPs or specific to, cell and gene therapies. Are you seeing any trends in that direction, or is that just me reaching?
Well, we're quite biased because we're definitely the first fund in the world to be purely specific to ATMPs and emerging modalities. So the best thing known about the best known thing about 4BIO is that we don't do small molecules and we don't do antibodies. So we're like basically third generation only, although we have quite broad remit across that. So we invest across gene therapy and gene editing, cell therapy, everything RNA, all targeted therapies, and microbiomes. So things as diverse as PROTACs and AAV gene therapies, but no allosteric modulators, inhibitors, or activators, and no naked mAbs or enzyme replacement therapies.
Why? Because you just love the risk. You just embrace that risk so much.
No, all of us in the team come from this area. So we're technology specialists, and this is how the firm's been built originally. And this is our DNA. This is also how we compete. We are a specialist fund. So think about us as a pilot boat. We take the early risk, we build companies and we seed companies, and we also occasionally do Series A. Mm-hmm. And it is our job to underwrite early stage technological risk like in Ray and make it more palatable to the larger, perhaps more generalist funds as we seek the next financing, because we don't have the resources to do a whole-blown Series A on our own. Unlike some of our venture creation peers who are much larger in the stage, who can carry a company till Series B pretty well. So that's how we operate. And the advantage is that now we've been doing this for over 7 years. And it's since we've been doing this basically since before the first commercial approval of a modern ATMP. Mm-hmm. And the amount of expertise that we've been able to build just in these very short 7 years is quite beneficial for what we're doing now. Yeah. At the same time, I'm not saying that there's no space for generalist funds. There's lots of space for generalist funds. Moreover, I'm really excited to see tech funds grow tech bio appendages and enter our space. I'm a Kaufman fellow and I hang out a lot with tech funds, and it's really great to see all my tech peers to go and start looking at our stuff and really contemplate investments in the space. The more dollars our space can attract, the better, because well, I say every day, I love fundraising.
Yeah.
Everybody hates fundraising. I love fundraising. I love going to endowments. I love going to asset managers and talking about genetic disease and cancer and how we're revolutionizing treatment with these therapies. Why? Because the problem we're facing, the problem of chronic disease that I want to fix. I want to fix human beings, basically. I fund everything that can repair human bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And this problem is bigger than you, bigger than Paul, bigger than me, bigger than all of us together. And unless we learn how to fix human bodies, all of our healthcare systems are going to disintegrate because we cannot afford them anymore. Yeah. Nowhere in the world we can afford modern treatment to the rapid aging population with band-aids, which is what we have now.
Right.
So the more people we can get involved in this broad church, the better. Tech investors, fabulous. All sorts of generalist investors, great. But this means that there is a niche or a pretty large playing field for specialist investors who can underwrite specific risks in this arena and make it more palatable to those who are coming in at the later stage.
Yeah. The infusion of tech, is that do you see that sort of as a result of the adoption of the computational biology concept, machine learning, in bio, specifically in biopharma?
That definitely had a part. Also, the largest tech funds have so much money that they needed to open frontier market for themselves because they're oversaturated. The same goes true for private equity groups. If you see there's a fascinating trend, I wrote an op-ed about this earlier in the year, that European venture funds in life science are getting acquired, the funds themselves, by large private equity groups. Now, the type of Carlyle and Apollo and EQT and so on. Several very well-known names like Abingworth and LSP have been taken out this year. This is because very large, very cash-rich groups want to open new markets for themselves, and biotech venture is an exciting new market for them. So I think that is what also drives the interest. And then thirdly, I think there is a certain drive from the grassroots, because now there are more venture capitalists in the world than just biotech venture capitalists. And if you're an academic seeking funding, you might not have a biotech VC buddy, but you might have a tech VC buddy. You go to them and say, hey, that's really cool. And you do all those complex things, satellites and deep sea cables and chemistry. And well, why don't you do my stuff? Yeah. And they go and thinking like, okay, why don't you do your stuff? I'll bet on the jockey, you know what you're doing. And so I think it also goes organically like this.
Yeah, very interesting. Paul, back to you. And I'm looking at the clock here and realizing we're running short on time. So just a couple more. If you guys are game, I'll ask you a couple more.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Paul, you I saw on the news that you guys just signed not too long ago signed a deal with 4BIO's over in Columbus. Ohio, which is Tim Miller has been a guest on my show. Columbus is just a few hours from where I sit right now, and it's a few hours that my wife frequently makes me drive because the shopping there is incredible. When you live in a small town in Pennsylvania, Columbus is a retail destination. But really cool company, growing very quickly. Tell me a little bit about that deal. Why'd you choose Forge?
Yeah, it's a great question, particularly because, CMC has become the valley of death in regen medicine. So choosing the right CDMO partner is probably the most critical decision, that a company can make. So we did a very extensive due diligence. We brought in outside consultants and, identified a number of appropriate CDMOs, and, Forge, they set themselves apart from everybody else. Firstly, they're extremely specialized in AAV gene therapy. Very impressed with Tim, and then David Dismuke, who's their CTO. The RetroSense team worked with him previously. Really brilliant guy, lots of familiarity with the optogenetic space, and I have to say it was really the best decision we could have made. Obviously as a startup, things are fluid, and one of the important components, of the working relation with a CDMO is flexibility. And they are very much on the ball. There's a very strong relationship between themselves and the management team. So Peter Francis works with them closely. Jenny Holt, who's our SVP of project management, she works with them very closely. So yeah, fantastic company.
Yeah, good deal. Yeah. What's next on the agenda as far as what that relationship will lead to? Where are you on the clinical journey? Kind of give us an update on where Ray sits right now and what the next steps are.
So as I said, earlier, we're anxious to get into clinic as quickly as possible, and of course, CMC is a critical part of that. Yeah. In terms of next steps for fundraising, we're just embarking on a Series A now, and feel quite optimistic about that. Given, of course, the fact that optogenetics itself is very much on the radar, and I think our management team will be very well received. I think our data really sets us apart from all of the other players in the field. So I'm very, very excited about the next few months, and in particular the next couple of years for Ray, when we actually get to see patients, or when the patients get to see, I should say more specifically.
Yeah. Just another real quick question on that Series A. As you kind of go out on that trail and look for that funding, does it, I guess, is it a feather in your cap to go out there with 4BIO's backing kind of in the rearview mirror?
It's critical. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, 4BIO is, very well respected in the space. They're very well known to all of the Series A investors that we've targeted. And, having Dima on the board and having the validation from Dima and 4BIO, who have so much expertise in the optogenetic space, it's very much of a value add in the Series A process.
Nice. Well, listen, I don't know.
Thank God you can see how I blush in a podcast.
Yes, I did. So we, for those of you listening to the podcast who aren't aware, you can go to our YouTube channel. You can go to bioprocessonline.com and you can watch the videos of these podcasts. And Dima's not kidding. He hung his head a little bit with a smile, and he blushed as Paul was just speaking. So
it's the truth.
It was clearly genuine. I don't know for sure that the questions that I asked were all the right ones for the benefit of our listeners. I do know that they were the right ones for me to ask, because I learned a ton. Like, this inside look at the relationship between investment seeker and an investor was super valuable to me. Again, I'm maybe a little bit more wet behind the ears than our average listener, but I can tell you that I learned a lot, and it was time well spent for me. I hope you guys feel the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I mean, I learned a lot today, so it was very, very enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you, Dima.
Thank you.
That's 4BIO Capital's Dr. Dima Kuzmin, Ray Therapeutics co-founder and CEO Paul Bresge, and I'm Matt Pillar. This is The Business of Biotech. We're produced by Bioprocess Online in partnership with Cytiva, which demonstrates its commitment to new biopharma innovation at its virtual biotech accelerator at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. Check that out. Check us out at bioprocessonline.com and sign up for my newsletter while you're there. If you're enjoying the pod, please subscribe. Leave us a review and some feedback. And as always, thanks for listening.